Hi, and welcome to the third installment of the Electric Lunch series brought to you by Title III at Peninsula College. My name is Eric Watercutty, and as you saw in the intro, today we're going to talk about web content and really how to plan and construct your website or web page. So, first, I'd like to start by looking at some examples of what makes a good site, what makes a bad site, through sort of the design perspective. So, first, I'd like to pull up uh, the world's worst website. This has been designed to illustrate kind of what not to do. So, it's actually a very useful resource in terms of finding out if you have some of these things on your site as it is now that kind of make it hard for people to interact with the information you've presented. So what I'd like to point out on this, other than it's kind of goofy for obvious reasons, but it actually serves as a really good document explaining why some of these things shouldn't be done. So I encourage you to kind of check this out and read through it. I will include this in my list of resources for this presentation, so take a look at that. Next up is one that's sort of not the world's worst, but it lets us hone in more on what makes kind of what's hard for users with just basic information presentation on the web. So in this example, you can see right away that the text being white on a light colored background makes it difficult for users to read. So in general, you try to have a high level of contrast between your text and the background that you have. The other thing is never, if at all possible, never have broken images on your site. Nothing's more frustrating for users than to see an image that's supposed to be there but only shows the little red box, red X, because we tend to wonder what that photo would have been. Another thing on this site is that in general, despite the colors they picked and things like that, it's a little bit difficult to discern what the main point of this is. I can tell it's a restaurant guide for Atlanta, but the organization of the links and the navigation and really kind of I can't really get a clear picture of what the main point is here and how to get at that information. So we're going to delve into some details on how to plan appropriately to make sure that doesn't happen. And the third example is a really interesting one because it shows a really neat design, but it lacks depth in terms of actually planning the information that supports a nice design. So while this layout might be pretty compelling and they've got a neat widget for sort of mousing over and showing these different things I can click on, all that happens when I click on one is that this little panel right here, difference number 172, changes. So it's kind of a lot of fancy, flashy material for not much content or information being conveyed. So this is a good example of what happens if you don't plan the content side properly. You could have the slickest design and layout out there, but if you don't actually present good information, then it's pretty much equally worthless to a poor design. So this one's an example of presenting quite a bit of information and doing it in a sort of as a model of what you should strive for. Not there's This page has a good amount of spacing between the sections. My eye can easily identify the kind of heading part of the page, the main gist of the information, the navigation, how I can get around to different areas of this site, as well as related links and things like that over here on the right. So news sites in general, this one being the BBC, have a challenge of presenting so much information that they really do have to have a good design in terms of how the information is communicated through their site, that I thought this would be a really good example to show. The final example I wanted to show as something to strive towards is one of the 2008 Webby Award nominees. Now, the Webby Awards are basically like Grammys or Emmys for websites on the internet, and this one was nominated in the category of education, and it's from Columbia University. And I encourage you to explore this site. These aren't supposed to be the best in the world, but as you can see, compared to some of our early examples of what not to do, this is definitely more in line with what to strive for. So this one, I think, fits well into the education realm, and there's actually a lot of really neat content here, so I suggest you following up on that one as well. Okay, so when we're sort of setting out to actually create a website and present information, I wanted to give you 4 basic steps or functions that need to happen while you're planning for this web page or website. Okay, these steps can be in any order, but I thought numbering them would just be helpful in terms of presentation. So, number 1, collect information. And what I mean here is that there's a couple things. Number 1, you're going to collect the content that you might already have lying around. So you might already have Word documents or spreadsheets that contain information that you're going to want to present on your website. So that's a good thing in terms of collecting information. Start gathering up all that content that you might already have so you don't have to sort of recreate stuff you already have. The other dimension to collecting information is to make sure that you've written down and you can describe the goals for your website. What is the primary goal of the website or web page you're putting together? Maybe it's to help the world learn about farm equipment, and you're going to walk through every piece of farm equipment that is on the market today, and you're going to explain to the world how it works and how it's made. Whatever your goal is, the importance is that you identify that goal and you write it down so that you can sort of stick to it throughout the planning phase. Another type of useful information to collect is information about your target audience. So in terms of our farm example, perhaps there's some different needs based on audiences that are sort of farmers already, or maybe farmers that are kind of up and coming farmers. They don't know as much about farm equipment, so they have a little bit different needs and they see the information differently. So once you've identified your kind of target audiences, another exercise that's very useful is to try to map out personas within those audiences. So you might have like the older farmer who's reluctant to try new things, and then you might have the young up and coming farmer who's very adept at using the web for information and things like that. So in step 2, group and categorize, what you're going to do here is you're going to take all of the content that you collected in step 1 in terms of content that can potentially fit on your website and is good for your site, and you're going to start to group it and try to categorize it. Now, the thing that happens here that's often missed is that people look at the information through their eyes only, and they don't look back at the audiences and the target audience and try to see if those categories and groupings make sense to the audience. So what you can do here is try to find a user that represents your audience, get them to take a look at your information and sign off on if that makes sense to them, or have them suggest other ways that you might group or categorize it. Okay, and then finally, map it out. You want to create a site map based on the categories and the content you've collected, and this can be a whiteboard drawing, a Visio diagram, doesn't really matter. Finally then is to create a process for maintaining the site. This is crucial and very often overlooked. So make sure you also identify the roles of who's going to maintain the site. Okay, that's it for this part.